Welcome back again, ladies and gentlemen, to Joe Stunner Boxing. I hope you've had a great weekend. I thought I'd do something a bit different, as you know, it's been a sort of boxingless weekend, hasn't it? But when people talk about great lightweights, I think there's a general modern consensus that the greatest lightweight of all was Roberto Duran, and you can absolutely make a case for that. Roberto Duran as a lightweight was incredible. He only lost once, so that was to a very, very good fighter called Esteban de Jesus. He avenged that defeat, his only lightweight defeat, with 2 wins by KO over de Jesus. De Jesus had a very sad demise. I think he became addicted to drugs and he eventually died of AIDS. There was a very famous picture of Roberto visiting him when he was in a hospice on his deathbed, giving him a big hug. But Duran was a great lightweight, a great fighter. We all know about Duran, right? However, if you want to talk about lightweights, you cannot dismiss Leonard. Now, not Sugar Ray Leonard. I'm not talking about Sugar Ray Leonard. Sugar Ray, of course, wasn't a professional lightweight. I'm talking about Benny Leonard. He was born Benjamin Leonard. He's a Jewish fighter. He was born in 1896. And he held the world lightweight title from 1917 to 1925. Now, what I normally do when I do these historical videos is I go by BoxRec records, because they're the ones that everyone goes to, is BoxRec. I think there's an alternative to BoxRec, which also recognises the WBA. I can't remember the name of them, CompuPunch, I don't know what the hell they're called. Anyway, I looked at the BoxRec record for Benny Leonard and an alarm bell went off because I don't think it's accurate. They listed him as having 90 wins with 71 KOs, 6 defeats, 5 by stoppage, and 1 draw. He had many more fights than that. He had about 221 fights, something along those lines. I'm sure of it. So I did what I normally do is I went to one of my old boxing books, the reference books, looked it all up. He had more than the fights that are on BoxRec. So I don't really want to go by BoxRec's records. But what I'll do is I'll give you an overview of whatever numbers you want to use. I'll give you an overview of Benny Leonard's career, because it is a sight to behold. He's one of the great fighters that only boxing hardcore historians, whatever you want to call them, experts, I hate that word, but you know what I mean. He's someone that if you know about the history of boxing, you will know about Benny Leonard, a great fighter who frequently, everyone from Nat Fleischer to I think ESPN did like a top 50 boxers or something, and he's always in the top 10. He's always in the top 10. Pound for pound, top tenner, not just at lightweight, but anyway, you can certainly make a case. He was a great fighter. So he turned pro at 15, like a lot of these old-timers, very young, and he lost his first fight by 3rd round TKO, along with Henry Armstrong lost his first fight, Bernard Hopkins lost his first fight. Doesn't really mean anything. He was only 15, and it was stopped allegedly because of a very serious nosebleed. You can't jump in the water without getting wet, can you? But he had a nosebleed. I stopped the fight. And then he got himself together, and he just perfected his craft over the years. He didn't always win. There were a couple of defeats along the way. And he was renowned for being a slickster, extremely fast reflexes. But unlike a lot of fighters who are slick boxers, he really did hit very hard, very hard. I mean, even this record, this 96-1 record that BoxRec lists, they say he had 71 KOs. I think an awful lot of the fights have been excluded on BoxRec simply because a lot of them were either no contests, no decisions. Probably newspaper decisions. Newspaper decision, by the way, they were very common 100 years ago, 100 or so years ago. It was basically a newspaper decision was a general consensus from the press that were present who won the fight, and they tot up their scores and give it, and it would be regarded as a newspaper decision. I never did like the idea. Can you imagine if it was nowadays? Can you imagine Gareth A. Davies scoring a Tyson Fury fight? Jesus Christ. Anyway. Leonard was extremely skilled, slick boxer, razor sharp reflexes, but he also hit very hard. And just a beautiful, skillful fighter. So in his early career, as he was learning, bearing in mind he's turned pro at 15, he lost twice to a guy called Frankie Fleming. And the second time he was knocked out I can't remember which round it was, but he was definitely knocked out. I can't remember the round. And he was only 16 years old at that point. And Fleming went on to fight the world champion Freddy Welch, who himself was a great fighter. Freddy Welch was Welsh, but that wasn't his real name. His real name was actually Frederick Hall Thomas. And he fought Welsh, which was, to take him on was an achievement, and he lost. And he also lost to world featherweight champ Johnny Kilbane. More about him later. And Kilbane held the featherweight title, the world featherweight title, from 1912 to 1923. And the fight against Leonard was in 1915. So Leonard would have been about 19 at the time. So he's learning. He loses a few against really good opposition, but he's learning. Okay. He beats a veteran, Joe Mandot, giving a beautiful boxing display. The reason I mention this is because the press reports could not say enough good things about Benny Leonard's skills. It was like, wow, and Mandot was a good, tough contender, veteran. But Leonard, at the age of about 19, just toyed with him. So suddenly his skills were coming together, and more importantly, his confidence was building. He was becoming a man, as opposed to turning pro as a boy. And, sublime boxing display, absolutely fantastic. He also fought and lost to Johnny Dundee. That was a newspaper decision, like I just mentioned, the newspaper decisions. But he also beat Tommy Langdon, who was another veteran, a win some, lose some, against very good opposition. That was a good win. He knocked out Jimmy Murphy, who had beaten Freddy Welch in a non-title fight, and Leonard knocked Jimmy Murphy out cold. He was out for a couple of minutes. So we're talking about things really coming together for Benny now. He's really getting his skills together. And then he twice fought Freddy Welch. And this was a title challenge. Eventually he fought, Freddy Welch was, again, the world champ. He twice fought him, in fact, and lost on both occasions. Leonard did. And the title fight was in 1916, which means Leonard would have been 20. He was almost knocked down in the second fight, and Welch won conclusively. But they would meet for a third time, so hold that thought, all right? Leonard's 0-2, but one more to come. And in 1917, he fought the former world bantamweight champion, a very, very underrated fighter called Jimmy Regan. He outpointed him and he almost stopped him. Now, Regan, again, bantamweight champ, very good fighter, but a bit too small for Leonard. Leonard would eventually challenge for the world welterweight title, but we'll get to that later. So he was bigger than Regan, but nevertheless, at the age of 21 or whatever he was, it was a good win. Regan still has something left. And then on May the 28th, 1917, Benny Leonard finally became the world lightweight champion. He stopped his old nemesis, Freddy Welch, in 9 rounds. And he floored him 3 times. And like I say, he's only 21 years old. So he got the world at his feet. He's the world lightweight champ. And he beat the great Freddy Welch. And Freddy Welch was great. Make no mistake about it. Okay, so on the... this was 2017, July 25th, Benny gained revenge over the world featherweight champ Johnny Kilbane, who we mentioned earlier, who'd beaten him. He knocked him out in 3 rounds. A towel came in. Kilbane was helpless on the ropes, more or less unconscious, and he made 6 defences of his world title. But that was in 8 years, so he wasn't fighting for the title much. That's not to say he wasn't fighting, he was. But in those days, if title defences were relatively infrequent. So if you look at someone like Jack Dempsey, he didn't defend his title much over a long period of time, many years. It's almost like, the money had to be right. I've got the title. What are you offering me? And if the money wasn't right and the money had to be very good, the title wasn't on the line. You didn't have ruling bodies forcing fighters to do mandatories and so on. And that's a bad thing. I mean, I'm not pretending that, people look at the old timers with rose-tinted specs and think everything was hunky-dory. No, it wasn't. There were things like that went on, which were very, very unfair. And of course, it's a subject for a different time. But you had the colour bar, the coloured titles. It all stank really. And there was corruption. You think there's corruption nowadays? It's no different from the old days. But anyway, he also beat good, decent contenders, veterans like Frank Kirk, Leo Johnson. He also fought Willie Jackson during in a benefit fight. This was during World War I. And he also drew with future welterweight champion Ted Kid Lewis. That was in 1918, so Benny would have been 22. And make no mistake about it, Ted Kid Lewis was a brilliant fighter, another Jewish fighter. There were a lot of Jewish fighters in these lower weights back in the day. The Jewish boxing has a very rich history, it really does. In 1919, Leonard beat Joe Benjamin. Now, Joe Benjamin would go on to be a very solid contender who would beat quite a few fellow contenders, good fighter. And he also beat other, good quality contenders like Phil Boom, Jimmy Duffy, Johnny Clinton. These were people who would not go on to achieve greatness, but were nevertheless valid contenders. It's like a lot of people with long records, it seems to be in vogue to take someone like Julio Cesar Chavez and say, as an example, and say, well, he didn't fight anyone. Look at that. He fought this cab driver and that. They're all crabbing it. A lot of those names were good fighters. Just because they haven't achieved greatness and you don't know them because you weren't even fucking born then, doesn't mean they were bad fighters. Some weren't very good. But also a lot of the non-title fights that someone like Chavez did were actually because he wanted his fans to see him fight. So he would take a low purse against a relative no hope, but just so his fans could see him, and also it kept him busy. It wasn't like just doing gym work. He was actually fighting under the lights. So there's a lot of shit talked about people with long boxing records. Of course, not all the opponents are good. But you don't, the fact is you're fighting every day and getting into that boxing ring is a hell of a thing. But anyway, I won't go into any more of a rant. Let's get back to Benny Leonard, okay? Because in 1920, Leonard beat Johnny Dundee. He beat him on the decision. They fought a total of 9 times. Johnny Dundee was another great fighter. It's no getting away from it. They fought 9 times. Leonard scored 2 wins, 2 draws, and there were 2 losses. And there were also, I think the others were no decisions. But I couldn't remember offhand. I'm too lazy to fucking look it up. I think that was right. They fought 9 times, and Leonard won 2, lost 2, and there were 2 draws. The rest, I think, were no decisions, but don't quote me on that. Leonard also fought a guy called Joe Welling, won by 14th round TKO, and floored Welling 4 times. And the reason I mention this fight is because it was at Madison Square Garden, 1920. But, we're having support acts like the Eminem was at one of the Riyadh things. Liam Gallagher did a set before one of the fights. Was it Dubois versus Joshua? Guess who was a support act for Benny Leonard and Joe Welling in 1920? None other than Charlie Chaplin. Charlie Chaplin did a routine before the fight. I don't know how that went down, but it did. But it may have gone down like a lead balloon. Charlie Chaplin was massively popular then. One of the funniest comedians around. They loved him, so all that silent stuff, the little tramp or whatever he called himself. But yeah, that was a support act. But there we go. And yeah, like I say, a 14th round TKO, which good fight anyway. People got their money's worth out of Leonard, even if they didn't like Charlie Chaplin. But in 1921, Leonard beat the future lightweight champion, another future champion, Rocky Kansas. That was on a decision. But here's the thing. Here's another thing I don't like about the old timers, right? Kansas, that was a title fight for the world lightweight title, and Kansas had to KO Leonard to win the belt. So even if he'd won a decision, which they did actually, they had a rematch, and Leonard beat Kansas. So this was 1922. He won a 15-round decision. But the idea that you've got to KO the champion, you can't just beat him on points to win the belt, is ridiculous to me. But there we are. Again, not everything that's old is good. Sometimes we do make good progress. Now, after the rematch, which Leonard won over 15 rounds against Rocky Kansas, he challenged Jack Britton for the world welterweight title. This was in June 1922. And he was disqualified in the 13th round for hitting Britton when he was down. And there were suspicions of a fix. The fix was in. Now, Ernest Hemingway, the writer, the famous writer, he was present, and he wrote a short story called 50 Grand, which was based on the bribe allegations, all the skullduggery that supposedly went down. And when he wrote this short story, he even mentioned Benny Leonard's name. Now, of course, you can be sued for that, slander and so on. But fortunately, F. Scott Fitzgerald, another great writer, was editing the story and took Leonard's name out of it. So silly old Ernest, the old boozy old sod, he wasn't sued. So yeah, bit of controversy in Leonard's career as well. But anyway, moving on, 1922, Leonard beat Lou Tendler. Now, Tendler is considered to be, by most boxing historians, as one of the best contenders to never win a world title. He was a great fighter, but he never won a title. This is it, you see. This is what happens when you tie up the belts. And, it's just not fair. Good, worthy contenders, brilliant fighters should get title shots. So, again, at the risk of sounding repetitive, which I'm sure I am, it's not a good thing. Everything in the old days, everything in the ye olde old school days is not good. Was not good. Okay, and that's a shame that Lou Tendler. I mean, he lost a 12-round decision. And in fact, they fought again. They fought for a second time, and Leonard won the rematch. That was over 15 rounds. And get a load of this, right? For that fight, that rematch, right? Benny Leonard took home, this was in 1922, Benny Leonard took home $130,000 in 1922. God only knows what that is. That's a massive amount. So he was rolling in money as well as rolling in talent and success. And then in 1923, he scored a 10th round TKO over Pinky Mitchell. Pinky Mitchell was... at the time was he held the world light welterweight title. This was an early version of those, super lightweight, junior welterweight, all that sort of stuff, the junior titles. He was a good fighter, Pinky Mitchell. He held that belt. Leonard floored him again as he was rising as well. There was controversy here as well. And a lot of people said Leonard should have been disqualified, but he actually got the win. It was a 10th round TKO. And ironically enough, despite the controversy, that was a charity event. So not very charitable, but there we are. Anyway, having conquered everything, not quite got over the line with the welterweight title, but nevertheless, as a lightweight, conquered everyone. Benny Leonard retired on January the 15th, 1925. So he was 28. About to turn 29 later that year. But he lost his money. And he lost it in the 1929 stock market crash. And he was a wealthy man, and he lost a lot, or virtually the lot. So he made a comeback in 1931. He was a pale imitation of himself. He did win 23 fights against nondescript opposition, and he was hoping for a big payday. Okay. And eventually he got it for 15 grand, which was better than nothing, considering he lost all his money. He fought the Irish-Canadian Jimmy McClellan, who himself a great fighter. There's some controversy here. I've spoken to a couple of Irish people. I said, when they say he was the greatest Irish fighter, I say Jimmy McClellan, and they say, well, yeah, but he was really Canadian. It's kind of like Bob Fitzsimmons, born in Cornwall, but grew up in America. And was he British? Was he American? Was McClellan Irish? Was he Canadian? Whatever. He was a great fighter. And he knocked Benny Leonard out in 6 rounds, the pale imitation of Benny Leonard. And that was the end of Benny Leonard. Now, in his post-boxing career, Benny was charismatic. He was a good-looking fella, still had his looks. He did things like advertisements. He appeared in vaudeville, appeared in movies. He was even in silent movies when he was still fighting, because he was a very good-looking fella. And he was always getting work. He did after-dinner speaking, for example. There was a demand to hear him speak. He served as a PT instructor during World War II. And this is the thing, he also got a job as a boxing referee. Now, Benny Leonard died of a massive heart attack at the age of 51. And it happened as he was refereeing a fight. So this is a man who, without question, holds one of the greatest boxing records in the history of the sport. He died in the ring, not as a boxer, but as a referee at the age of only 51. So... how poetic is that? I wonder what Ernest Hemingway and F. Scott Fitzgerald would have thought about that. But yeah, April the 17th, 1947, age 51, Benny Leonard passed away of a massive heart attack. Not much of an age, is it, 51? But what a legacy, what a career. And yeah, That's Benny Leonard for you. That's a little 20-minute overview. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you've got anything you'd like to say, like to comment on, please leave your comments below. And yeah, thank you very much for listening. If you did enjoy the video, you can hit the like button. That'd be great. And also, you know, if you're a new subscriber, thank you. If you have subscribed, obviously, thank you. I always appreciate your support and your time. But if you're new to the channel, please subscribe. It'd be a massive help to us, and it's free, and it takes you a second to pop that button. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for sticking with me as always. Much love, and bye for now.